In 2019, I moved across the country to live in San Diego County, and so on a warm August 24th, 2019, I decided to go downtown to film. The Pacific Milestone in Horton Park Plaza caught my eye. I was intrigued by the milestone because of a unique experience I had many years ago. It looked like it would be there for another 100 years. It didn't even last a year after I walked past it. It was removed from the plaza upon the order of the city in 2020 after a public backlash amidst national unrest related to the brutal killing of an African American arrested in Minneapolis, Minnesota, named George Floyd. The milestone, erected in 1923, commemorated the old Spanish Trail and Lee Highway, but as a public honor, it was doomed and would not survive past 2020. Yes, the Lee Highway was named in honor for that Lee, General Robert E. Lee of the Confederate States of America, who led the rebels against the Union back when the nation split into two and fought a bloody civil war. Despite the noble intentions, it was taken down quickly, as was a marker for a highway named after Jefferson Davis, the President of the Confederate States of America, in 2017. The people who created and celebrated this milestone long ago, in good faith, deserve for the full story to be told about what happened. I'm George Farrar. It's time for me to tell you the Pacific Milestone Story. Welcome to our first annual History San Diego Summer Show. My visit that day in August 2019 became incredibly special because long ago, as a kid in Jacksonville, Florida, on one of my many visits with family to St. Augustine in the mid-1980s, I had seen a milestone in the nation's oldest city, St. Augustine, which referenced San Diego. At that moment, I had two thoughts that I never forgot about. They're standing there as a kid. San Diego is so far away, I'll probably never ever get the chance to see it. I would have even considered moving out of Florida until around 2004 when I visited California for the first time. As I stood in the plaza in San Diego in 2019, I thought back to that. Back then, I was just some kid interested in history, running around St. Augustine with brochures I got from the visitors center nearby. Now I live in El Cajon and I make history shows for people throughout the world to enjoy, along with my day job. The Pacific Milestone commemorated the connection of San Diego with the Southern Transcontinental Highway. To understand why all of this was such a big deal, we have to go back to the early years of the 20th century. If you wanted to effectively get around the United States and go on big journeys, most likely you took the railroad or you took a ship. Let's say that you wanted to go to Yuma, Arizona in the early years of the 20th century. Well, you'd have to actually take the railroad to Los Angeles. Then you would transfer to go out to Yuma. It's not like it is today where you would just jump on the 8 freeway and speed out to Yuma. A whole different time back then. And so those were the big modes of transportation. So there were not really any sophisticated roads. We didn't have freeways. We didn't have much anything. It wasn't until around 1915 that people were able to get the plank road constructed, which was basically the cars at the time would drive over these planks. So it was really old. It was really cumbersome to travel. It wasn't very easy to travel. And so ultimately, San Diego benefited from the work of a man named Colonel Ed Fletcher. And I look forward to profiling him later on in our History San Diego series. He was a state senator. He was a big advocate for road building. He helped to get roads built not only in San Diego County, but east of San Diego County. He worked to get the plank road built. uh, he went out to different highway associations to pitch San Diego. Now we think, of course, about all the roads and the highways and the freeways that connect San Diego with all points beyond. But back then, it just wasn't happening until people got motivated and got the roads and the highways built. And then ultimately, you had another choice. Ultimately, air travel would come along. But when it came to being able simply to drive to San Diego, that was becoming more and more of a reality for more and more people by the time the 1920s came along. And there's this big final culminating completion of a lot of the different road projects and things like that were connecting up the city. And so it was time to commemorate it, and people decided it was time to honor Colonel Fletcher. I will now share with you from Wikipedia some details about how the highways developed. Established in 1914 by the Automobile Club of Savannah, the Dixie Overland Highway Auto Trail was the first major route connecting San Diego, California, and Savannah, Georgia. The Dixie Overland Highway Association debated on definitive western endpoint for the highway in Southern California. California politicians Stanley Hoofland and Ed Fletcher convinced the association in an August 1918 meeting to choose San Diego over Los Angeles. Fletcher was responsible for a grassroots campaign years earlier that resulted in the construction of the Plank Road across the Aguadones Dunes in 1915. The Plank Road was the final link in the main highway to San Diego. The association agreed to make San Diego the Dixie Overland Highway's western terminus in 1919 and elected Fletcher as the association's president. The highway now followed most of what would become US 80. Other sections of future US 80 were designated as parts of the Lee Highway and the Old Spanish Trail. One of the planned highways was US 80 between Savannah and San Diego. On November 11, 1926, all the proposed highways in the system, including US 80, were officially designated. Ed Fletcher continued his involvement with the route after it became US 80, becoming president of the newly formed US 80 Highway Association. During his time with the association, Fletcher lobbied the federal government to pay for improvements to the highway and actively promoted US 80 to motorists. And so that was the excerpt that I selected from Wikipedia, edited for content. So I'd like to just briefly mention a couple more things about Colonel Fletcher before we move on. Colonel Fletcher was also a businessman. He was a produce merchant, so he and other businessmen in San Diego were highly motivated to connect the city up with other cities and communities, up with the rest of the United States, because with each connection made and solidified and made improved over time and made better, more people, more commerce, more business, more industry could come into San Diego. I mean, I myself, many years later, when all the roads and highways and freeways were built, benefited off of this kind of initiative. San Diego was not ever going to be some remote backwater. That was not going to happen. This wasn't going to happen because of the work, not only of Colonel Fletcher, but of numerous people, leaders at that time, who traveled extensively throughout the country to make these eventual highways a reality. So now let's look at the celebration. And there was a big one in November of 1923. On Sunday, November 18th, 1923, many people gathered in downtown San Diego to celebrate the dedication of the milestone in Horton Park Plaza. I will now read to you a portion of the article that appeared in the San Diego Union newspaper. President marks end of highway. Colonel Fletcher unveils marble monument in plaza when Coolidge touches button in National Capitol. The conclusion of 15 years of effort for a southern transcontinental highway was celebrated here yesterday afternoon when President Coolidge, with the assistance of Colonel Ed Fletcher, unveiled the Pacific Coast milestone of the Lee Transcontinental Highway. Shortly before 1:45 o'clock yesterday afternoon, the President, in his Washington office, touched an electric button that rang a gong in the plaza here. At the signal, Colonel Fletcher, Vice President of the Lee Highway Association, unveiled the handsome marble milestone and read the President's message. Stone is San Diego marble. The ceremonies were brief but impressive. Besides his reading of the President's message to San Diego, Colonel Fletcher made a few remarks of his own, and he was followed by Mayor Bacone and Admiral A.H. Robertson, each of whom spoke a few words appropriate to the occasion. The milestone, which marks the Pacific terminum of the Lee Highway, is a solid piece of San Diego County marble donated by the Verruga Marble Company. It is located in the plaza to the east of the fountain and bears on its east face the shield of the Lee Highway and the designation as the Pacific end of the highway, which starts at Washington, D.C. On the western face is a bronze tablet bearing testimony to the high regard of San Diego citizens for Colonel Fletcher, whose activity has played an important part in the establishment of the highway. The stone was draped with a flag, which at the tap of the gong was hoisted to a staff erected on the speaker's platform. The masked bands of the scouts which had assembled at the milestone for the ceremony played the national anthem, and as the last strains died away, Colonel Fletcher read the following message from the President. Recalls Harding. This is now the message from President Coolidge. It is a pleasure to comply with the request of your Lee Highway Association and the City of San Diego to send a message for the dedication of the Pacific Milestone. President Harding was to have dedicated the Pacific Milestone and had planned to make an address at San Diego on this subject of highways. Perhaps then I may appropriately recall something of what he said in dedicating the Zero Milestone in Washington on June 4th last. Referring to the highway system, which at all times have served to unify society and promote civilization, he spoke of our national highway system of 200,000 miles of modern, improved roads, together with more than 2 million miles of rural highways, which yet remain to be improved as rapidly as economic conditions shall justify. President Harding emphasized the necessity to utilize every form of transportation to the utmost practicable extent and commended the various associations which have fostered the Good Roads movement. Particularly, he thanked the Lee Highway Association for erecting the Zero Milestone, the Pacific Milestone, and others which have been made official benchmarks of the United States Coast and Geodetic Survey. Just as the Zero Milestone marks the point of the initiation of this splendid transcontinental highway, so the Pacific Milestone marks the place of its contact with the Pacific. The Southern Transcontinental Highway is already in a large part finished. A relatively small mileage remains to be brought up to the best present-day standards, but I'm informed that most of these sections are included in the system of federal aid roads, and that in a near future, the necessary links will have been forged. When they are finished, this highway will stand as one of the continuous transcontinental routes available at all seasons of the year for easy transportation. In accepting this monument, it is fitting to express thanks to the citizens of San Diego, the Imperial Valley, of Yuma, Arizona, and the state of California for their particular contributions. The Lee Highway Association has done a work of national unification in opening up this route between the national capital and Southern California. The monument may well be dedicated to the purpose of marking the meeting place of the splendid highway with the waters of the Pacific, in the hope that it may hasten the coming day of a perfected system of highway communication throughout the entire nation. I hope you enjoyed what President Coolidge had to say on that historic day as the Pacific Milestone was dedicated. There are two words that jump out at me from his message and I think they may have jumped out for you when you're listening. National unification. San Diego sought to be connected with the United States of America. Businessmen wanted to trade. Travelers wanted to travel. People wanted to visit family and friends, see places that they had never been to. Increasingly, the people of the United States were going to get these opportunities as cars emerged off the assembly lines. People were going to get a chance to see their country on their own terms, not necessarily on the terms of a shipping or railroad timetable. This is going to change. It already was changing Southern California. At the beginning of our story, I talked about the removal of the Pacific Milestone from Horton Park Plaza in 2020 as a result of the national unrest due to the tragic killing of an African-American George Floyd in Minneapolis by a police officer. So there was all of this unrest in cities all over the country, and as a result, the milestone was removed. Now, this was as a result of this, as well as the trend towards removal as it happened in 2017 with the Jefferson Davis Highway marker that was also in the plaza. And I think really when we look at it with the themes that we saw in the early 20th century, the concept of building connections, national unification, we can see where this attempt for reconciliation did not materialize as people would have liked. When you're building connections and you're building things and you're working with people over the country, people make compromises, and in this case, the fatal compromise for the milestone was the inscription of Lee. The idea being that it was decided to name a major highway in the United States of America after General Robert E. Lee, who led the fight against the Union that resulted in the deaths of thousands of Americans in the Civil War. Loss of people, property, economic prosperity. But because that region, southern region, wanted to honor him, compromise was reached, and that's what resulted. These associations formed up, and it was the way highways developed. It was developed out of the association, not out of a government agency, until later on when things developed more towards government. These were associations, as I mentioned earlier, people working together. I would say that I think there's a lot less of people working together in critical times. But you know what? There is one monument to Fletcher that still stands, and I don't know what I would do without Fletcher Parkway. When you drive into San Diego on these wide freeways at high speeds, think about the people that made it happen. And just remember that it took a lot of hard work, effort, initiative, compromise to get the San Diego we have today, for better or worse. I want to thank you for watching the Pacific Milestone Story, and today I would like to personally invite you to check out our Facebook page, History San Diego. And I want to invite you to, if you haven't already done so, to subscribe to our YouTube channel, History San Diego. And if you haven't already done so, consider watching Season 1 of History San Diego. And in September 2022, we're going to have History San Diego Season 2. And I invite you to join this quest for knowledge, this time for reflection that I put together for you to enjoy and for us to think about the past, and why not think about the present and the future while we do so. Take Take it easy. See you later.
And down there.